And you look at him, you're like, I know you could kill me with the eraser of a pencil 15 different ways. And the SEALs kind of have this, they call it the 40% rule, which basically says that if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, that you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. 40%, I'm not even at half of my capability, but it's our brains that tell us, hey, this hurts, it's uncomfortable, knock it off. And we listen to our brains. But the only way you're going to grow.
Welcome to the Quantum Theory Podcast. Today we are joined by Terry Tucker, a former D1 college basketball player, police officer, SWAT hostage negotiator, and cancer warrior. He's now an acclaimed author and speaker on topics such as personal excellence and purpose, with his most recent book being Sustainable Excellence, which will be a large focus of today's conversation. But without further ado, Terry, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, Jared, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Awesome. Likewise. So I'd love to kick things off. Speaking of excellence, one of the things that really caught my eye, and to kind of start off a little abstract here and to get some ideas on some kind of basic principles, one of the things that was really interesting was you compared excellence to beauty, in the sense that it is relative, similar to beauty being that of the eye of the beholder. And I thought that was interesting because I think the common connotation of excellence is a very hard line benchmark and standard that we all kind of feel is kind of rigid. So I like to kind of lay some fundamentals here and kind of get to the bottom of the nature of purpose and its kind of relative property, if you will.
Sure. So, you write a book called Sustainable Excellence, and then people, ask you what excellence means, and you're like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, what do you mean? You wrote the book. How could you not know what excellence is? But to me, excellence is in the eye of the beholder. You and I may look at a sports team or a piece of music or a piece of art or something like that, and you may say, man, I think that's excellent. And I may look at it and say, yeah, I think it's good, but I just don't think it's excellent. So I think we have to decide for ourselves what excellence means. And that kind of leads us to what is our purpose in life. And we all have a different purpose. We all have a different calling, I guess, a why, a mission, whatever however you want to define it. But so many people, I think, never ever think about what it means to be great at something purposeful in life. We just kind of muddle through. And I'll give you a quick story. There's an entrepreneur by the name of Ed Milet, and in 2023, USA Today chose him as the entrepreneur of the year. You know it. Okay.
Yeah.
And he talks about the 4 types of people in the world. And when I first heard him say this, I'm like, all right, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if I believe this. Let me think about it. But let me just tell you what he talks about. He said the first group are the unmotivated. And he said that's the vast majority of people you will encounter in your life. The second group he talks about are the motivated, where it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. He says it's kind of low level, but it works for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life. The third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from 2 words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And so I'm giving a talk or something like that, and depending on the audience, I'll tell that story. I'll be like, all right, show of hands. How many people are unmotivated? And nobody ever raises their hand. Nobody feels fall into that category. But I think so many people do, which then leads to people that if you have just a little bit of grit, it's amazing what you can do with your life.
Wow. I love that. Yes. And I am familiar with Ed Milet and his whole max out mantra. I love all of his work as well. It's super applicable. And I think kind of segueing on the idea of purpose, one of the things that I recall you mentioning in the book as well is living by purpose and not living by job or by career. And one of the things I think that's so challenging is, really figuring out a way to structure our lives around purpose. So let's say that, we do understand that, this certain thing, helping other people in this one way is really our calling. But I think there's so many challenges that come up along the way, like paying the bills and staying financially afloat, and so many, taking care of the family. And, I'd love to get some insight on how you kind of maybe have even suggestions or insights or even words of wisdom for how people can, surmount those challenges and really create a life by design in that way.
Sure. So I guess let me go back just for a second and talk about, I think a lot of times we look at purpose as a singular thing. There's one thing I'm supposed to do. And I can't speak for anybody else, but I can speak for myself. For me, that word has been plural. It's been purposes. I think when I was younger, my purpose was to be an athlete. I played college basketball. And then as I got to be an adult, I always felt my purpose was to be in law enforcement. I had other jobs, but I always felt my purpose was law enforcement. And now, in all honesty, as I'm probably coming towards the end of my life, I think my purpose has shifted again to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world with whatever time I have left. So how do you find your purpose? I think you look at what your unique gifts and talents are. We all have, if you told me, Terry, you're going to be an accountant and you're going to work with numbers, Jared, I would fail miserably. And I would probably be miserable at that job. That's not my forte. That's not what I work at, or that's not what I'm good at. So I would suggest people find what they're good at. And the other thing I'll say is this. We're not successful in a vacuum. Nobody does this by themselves. I would suggest if nobody remembers anything else I say for this entire podcast, remember this. This I think is incredibly important. It's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. Find people that care about you. Find people that are willing to invest in you. Find people that want to see you succeed. Hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together. So find like-minded people. If you're hanging around smart people, you're going to be smarter. If you're hanging around wealthy people, you're going to be wealthier. Conversely, if you're hanging around people with drama and it's all about them, that's what you're going to end up being. Find good people, emulate what they're doing, use your unique gifts and talents, and I think you're well on your way to finding your purpose.
So bridging that, given that we're kind of starting from a foundation of unique gifts and talents, do you think that we are somewhat endowed with certain gifts that we're supposed to discover, which is our purpose? Do you think that those gifts that we have is kind of even one and the same with our purpose, and it's kind of our even job to discern how we can even use those towards a positive benefit? Because it sounds like really the foundation is what you are kind of naturally gifted with, if you will.
I would absolutely agree with that statement. I think if you look at somebody like Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, was a Holocaust survivor during World War II, he talks about how we should not look at our life in the abstract, that every one of us has a purpose, has a reason that we were put on the face of this earth, and almost goes so far as to say we have a moral obligation to find that purpose in life and to live it. So I would absolutely say, you're just not here kind of skipping around, and seeing how it goes. But the other thing I'll say about that is this, and I heard this story, Jesse Itzler, I don't know if he still is, but he was, he's an entrepreneur. At one point, he owned part of the Atlanta Hawks in the National Basketball Association. And he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely. And Sarah Blakely started a woman's undergarment company called Spanx. And Itzler tells this story. He said when she started that company, she had one prototype and $5,000. She had been a door-to-door facsimile salesman, a fax salesperson. I don't even use faxes anymore. That's how long ago that was. But his point was she really didn't know anything about marketing, about human resources, about legal, about manufacturing, about distribution. But his comment was, if she would have waited until she understood every single thing along that journey, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would have come up with that idea and would have run with it. So his point was, wherever you are in trying to figure out your purpose, don't hold back and say, when I get this or when I understand that, then I'll do it. Jump in right now and figure it out as you go along.
I love that. Yeah, it's the kind of the old adage that the conditions will never be perfect, and It's the journey itself, which is the gift. That is the process of what creates you into that person. And that gets to a point that you mentioned, in the sense that, suffering is one of life's greatest teachers. And on that path, there will invariably be a lot of suffering, as you don't know legal and accounting and, building these types of partnerships, and, that you're going to lose a bunch of money probably several times. You might even get close or actually go out of business and have to try again. Right. And in that journey is such immense suffering. But as you mentioned, it's one of life's greatest teachers. And I think that's even a perennial philosophy. Even look at, Buddhism. Their whole thing is, life is essentially suffering, not in like a morbid way, but, in a constructive way. And I want to quote you from the book here, because I really felt that this was profound. You said, quote, "I lost 50 pounds during my interferon therapy. I was always nauseous, fatigued, and chilled. My ability to taste food diminished, and my body continually ached. This misery went on for 1,660 days. Wow. And I'm sure you can track the number of days, because each one was that distinctly challenging. And obviously that is a magnitude of suffering that most, including myself, can't even wrap our heads around. But I would love just to hear your perspective, given that background and what you've surmounted, what you've gained out of suffering through such intense trials and tribulations.
Sure. So 2012, I was diagnosed with this very rare form of cancer, rare form of melanoma, and was told it appeared on the bottom of my foot, and they removed the part in my foot, and they all removed all my lymph nodes. And then my doctor said, "You'll probably be dead in 2 years, because we have nothing to offer you other than surgery. If it's somewhere we can cut it out, we'll cut it out. If it's not, well, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you." So in the interim, she put me on this drug called interferon. And I took a weekly interferon injection, and it gave me terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And Jared, during that time, I was so sick of being sick that I prayed to die. It was like, okay, God, I kind of felt there were two camps. There was the living and there was the not dying. And I was definitely in the not dying. I wasn't really living. I was just not dying. I wasn't contributing to my family, or at least I didn't feel I was. I wasn't contributing to my friends. Sometimes a good day was literally, I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to make it to the sofa. That's a good day. And you think about that, that's really not living. And so I have a very strong faith in God. So it was like, okay, God, just take me on. Let me die. Let my family get on with their life. But God didn't do that for me, Jared. But he did give me the strength to continue to go on day after day after day. And today, I believe my purpose, going kind of back to what we were talking about, I believe my purpose is to use my infirmity, to use my malignancy, to show people God's love, his mercy, his kindness, his peace, his healing. That's what I'm here for. I should have died a long time, several times during this journey, and I did. And I think he's using me at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care when I die. I don't care how I die. What I care about is, am I doing my purpose right now?
Wow. That's incredible. And, I definitely resonate with kind of what I call seeing in retrospect. It's, seeing kind of how things from the past, sort of create this, I guess, connection to what your, future trajectory is, and how you're supposed to use those things and transmute those experiences to, give back as gifts to others. And that's kind of connected to suffering. It's you are sort of gaining something through that experience, which you can then go, give back to others. And I love the aspect of, or kind of your thought process around, God really being really involved in that situation. And I think one of the things that you talked about as well, even when you're going to go quit your basketball team and you got that letter from your dad, I mean, literally on the way to quit, and you said you'd never gotten a letter from him before, ever. And on the walk there, you stopped by and got it, and just completely altered the course of your life. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and I feel like I might know somewhat of the answer, but how involved do you think that God, our creator, however you want to conceptualize that creator or that force, how intimately involved do you think that God is in our lives in that way?
I mean, for me, I think he's very involved. I think he wants to be as involved as you'll let him. You know, I mean, we always think we got to search for God. I don't think you got to search for him. I think he's already here. You just got to let him, you know, it's kind of like knocking on the door. It's like, hey, I'm here. Will you let me in? And so, yeah, I think it was really divine intervention. I mean, I was going to give up a full college scholarship and go home with no plan, no nothing. Jared, I'd never quit anything in my life.
Wow.
I was going to quit this. And then I get this 7-page letter, handwritten letter from my father that basically said, I love you. I am proud of you, but pull your head out of your butt is basically what he said to me. You know, you can do this. I was homesick when I went into the Army, you know, back in the 1950s and things like that. Everybody's been through this. You're not unique, but you are so in your head right now that you think the whole world revolves around you. It doesn't. He said, he even told me, he said, you called home 7 times since you've been at college, and not once have you asked, how are my brothers doing? How's my mom doing? How are my grandparents doing? How's my girlfriend doing? You've never asked anything. You are so into you. So that was really the first time that I kind of felt that God was like, yeah, hey, I put this out there, and then I turned this into my book. You know, it's like, I never expected to write a book, Jared. Never wanted to write a book. There's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God,
I love that.
You know, but I think, as I said, what God did with the book is he put enough people in my path that said, Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book. And I think I'm older now, wiser, more understanding that when these things happen, it's God's way of saying, look, I want you to do this. You have free will. You can say, no, you know what? I don't want to write a book. I don't want to do that. I'm going to quit college. I'm going to do whatever I want. But I'm telling you what I'd like you to do. Will you do that for me? So, you know, it's happened more than once in my life. And the older I get, the more I pay attention to it.
Absolutely. And I think really, you know, these messages, I think you even said this in the book as well, they come as whispers, right? Not as these calamities and shouts, right? And it's only in those moments of stillness and where you're really receptive and open to that is where you can then really get that insight or get that guidance or be aware of even what's being shown to you. So no, I totally resonate with that. And I think one thing you mentioned too is about the idea of being so self-centered in that state you were in. And one thing in the book you mentioned is the importance of being part of something bigger than yourself. Now, and to quote you as well, before I move on, the point is you said, quote, and true love is sacrificing self for others and is the most important thing in the world. And the idea of that we are here as a collective and it's about not just the self. And would you even say that purpose is inexorably connected to the broader whole or being part of something? Can you have purpose on even an individual level, or is it de facto something of service to a broader whole, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. And I think it is. I am of the generation who kind of grew up with Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers.
I remember.
Yeah. And there's a great story about Fred Rogers when he died. I mean, he educated so many young people on public television, including me when I was growing up. And when he died in 2003, his family was going through his effects and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written 4 simple words. And those words were, life is for service. And I think that is so important. That's what life is about. You know, Jared, there's a great, I'll call it a fable. I don't think it actually happened, but it's a great fable about Alexander the Great, about how probably the biggest conqueror, the biggest megalomaniac in the world of all times was dying. And he calls his counselors together and he says, hey, I want you to carry out my final 3 wishes. He said, my first wish is I want only my doctors to carry my coffin to the grave. My second wish is I want the road to the cemetery paved with gold and silver and precious stones. And my third wish is that my hands be hanging out of my coffin. And one of his counselors stepped up and said, excuse me, you're Alexander the Great. You're the most powerful man in the known world. Those don't seem like really big, grandiose wishes. Why did you come up with these wishes? He said, well, number one, I want my doctors to carry my coffin to the grave because I want people to understand that no doctor heals anybody. They just help the body to heal itself. So people should pay attention to how they're treating their body, what they're putting in it, even their mind. The mind is part of it. What are you putting in? You put in good food in your body, you get good stuff out. You put good stuff in your mind, you get good stuff out. He said, my second wish is that I spent my entire life conquering people, getting money, power, importance, influence, and yet none of that is going with me beyond the grave. And then he said, the third part of my hands hanging out of my coffin is I want people to understand that I came into this world empty-handed and I leave it the same way. So Jared, I would say life is not about what you can get. It's about what you can give in your life with your unique gifts and talents.
That's an incredible story and analogy. It's unfortunate that it takes many people to get to the very, very, very end of the line to then realize that their efforts were entirely futile because it has no bearing on the hereafter, or, it was just a purely selfish, in many cases, material pursuit. And I think the sooner people can snap out of it and enter a purpose-driven type of path is where that course is completely altered. We don't end up like Alexander the Great sitting there saying, well, I just wasted 8 or 9 decades, or however long he lived in my life. That was pointless, right? And to even backtalk a little bit, would you even say that sort of the equation of purpose is how you can use your gifts to positively affect others? Could it be distilled down that simply?
I honestly think it can. And I know I've seen this, and I bet you have too in your life, that so many people out there kind of feel that they're born empty, and that when they get out of school and get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that they feel their job then is to fill up that empty cell. I've got to make the most money, drive the nicest car, live in the nicest house, have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And honestly, Jared, what I found is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full with whatever we need to be successful, however you define that word in your life, already inside us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it for our benefit. So our job in life should not be to fill ourselves out. Our job in life should be to empty ourselves out, certainly, with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for our benefit, but also for the benefit of our families, of our friends, and of our communities. And when you make that paradigm shift in your life, especially in today's society where, all kinds of advertisements are telling, if you have this car, if you drink this drink, or if you eat this food, you're going to be important, special, influential, whatever. None of that matters. None of that matters. You look at the greatest person in the world, who I think is Jesus Christ. It was all about giving. He was poor. He didn't have a lot of things, but yet he was the ultimate, as far as I'm concerned. He made this. He made all of us. And he's saying, love each other, care for each other. And you mentioned it. We talk, guys don't talk about love. Right. We don't talk about love. But I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about love in willing the good of the other. Jared, I want what's best for you. I want what you think is best for you and what God thinks is best for you. That's what love is all about. And how often do we ever do that?
Right. No, 100%. And that kind of gets my, kind of physics mind kind of fired up on the other side of my platform, because, love is one of the highest frequency emotional states that we have. If you're familiar with any of that type of, research in terms of that realm, but it connects directly. I think our core essence is love. And when you operate from that space, that's really the true nature. Everything else is a lack. You don't have this. You don't have that. You're not good enough for this. And that's the consumer, as you were just saying, the consumer culture. It's everything is outside of you versus you being entirely full and just overflowing, in a sense of service. So I fully agree where you're coming from with that. And one of the things I think would be useful to even discuss too, just for maybe even like the young men and women out there listening and trying to find their purpose. And they definitely have a similar challenge on many people to what you experienced, which is, when you were getting in, out of college and going into the work world, you wanted to be a police officer. You knew it in your bones. It was unquestionable, but it's so hard to overcome that parental, even potentially father figure, sort of, control or even just knowing that they want what's best for you and that they love you. And who am I, to just completely sideswipe that, but you know, something's there. What kind of advice would you give to even the younger folks about how to kind of navigate those waters when there's a conflict between what they know in their heart versus kind of what the top-down pressure against that kind of passion is?
Sure. So for people that don't really kind of understand my story, if you look at my resume, it kind of looks like a Super Bowl went off in the room. It's just kind of like all over the place. But there is a backstory. And if you understand the backstory, the resume makes more sense. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, when my dad was 1 year old, my grandfather was shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories growing up that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So you can imagine when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely, you're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, you're going to get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after.
Right.
That's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. And I guess what I would say to young people today, and I am so proud that I did this in my life, is never let your dream die. When I mentioned when I graduated from college, my father was dying of cancer. So I had a choice. I could have said, hey, Dad, no, you're dying. Sorry about that. I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first 2 jobs were in business because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And I started, Jared, I did what every good son did. I waited until my dad passed away and I followed my own dreams. But I am so proud that I never settled for what I was supposed to do. I knew I was supposed to do this. I didn't know when I was going to do it, but I knew at some point in time I was going to do it. And I did it when I was 37 years old. And 37 years old is pretty old to be getting into law enforcement, to getting into that kind of work.
It's incredible you just hung on to that for so long. And I think that's just a testament to what purpose is, right? It's almost inescapable to an extent. You may never act on it, but it'll always be there. And I think that's almost a feature of purpose. It's almost a signal. If you've been decades down the road and you can't let something go, you need to pay attention to that and you got to investigate that. And you knew, so you're a certain case, even those that are less certain. It's, listen to that just constant chirping like, hey, I love this, really love to do this, really can help people with this, really inspired by this. And it's just something you constantly kind of come back to here and there. I think it's just more encouraging people to kind of take heed from that and kind of see some texture to what that kind of looks like, in their life.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, my dad didn't do that for me or to me because he didn't like me. I mean, my dad was my hero. I mean, he died when he was in his 50s, right after I graduated from college. And it killed me. But he did this because he wanted what he believed was something better. So if you're out there and you've got those parents or those aunts and uncles or brothers and sisters or whatever saying, you should do this, I guess I would look at them and say, what makes you say that? And see what their action is. They don't live in your body. They don't know the thoughts in your mind. They don't know the talents. Well, some of them do, I guess. Know the talents that you have. And it's hard for people you love that are older, that want your best interest in mind, to kind of go against them. But if that's what you believe is in your heart, is in your soul, I would tell you to pursue it. I would, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even in a month, but at some point in time, don't let the dream die. That's why you're here. I would hate to get up in front of my Creator at the end of my life and say, yeah, you gave me these unique gifts and talents, and I felt that tug in my heart that said I should do this, and I ignored it. I can't imagine standing in front of my Creator and saying that.
We are irreplicable and each unique, and will never be in the same exact form ever again. We are a one of one, like a snowflake, literally. Yep. And it's to sort of disregard that. You are literally an embodiment of the Creator, and And, I kind of go back to physics a little bit because like the holographic principle and, we are a fractal. So we have all the attributes, of the creator because we're kind of a piece of that. And so we have these endowed gifts, and it's the biggest travesty to completely, sideswipe those and opt for a life of, just the basics, or as Ed Milet said, that the unmotivated or even maybe motivated at best. And when the potential is just so massive, because the real potential in your life comes from a result of acting on purpose, because that's the path I believe that's laid out for you. Your real path is the one where you follow the purpose, and that's where the gold on the other side of the tunnel is in every type of category: monetary, spiritual, relationship wise, all of that. And I think that free will, I think you touched on this as well. It's not that there's just this like infinite choice, but it's that there are different versions that we can choose, and each decision brings new possibilities and new decisions. And I think our free will is, are we going to recognize those things and then take action on those? Because that's really where the prize is. Or are we going to opt for just these lower levels of existence?
Yeah, I mean, small minds and weak people, I think, kill big dreams. Going back to, people don't ever think about what it means to be great at something purposeful in their life. A lot of times when I talk to young people, it's like, whatever you're thinking, think bigger. Think bigger. I mean, we like to say, okay, this is good and it's comfortable. And so I'm good with it. But if you thought bigger, oh yeah, that's kind of scary. But I'll tell you right now, at the end of your life, if there is something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, I'm going to sit here and tell you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be those things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
100%. Well said. I'd love to kind of now, shift gears a little bit, because I know we've been just straight into the philosophy, which I love. Yeah, I'd love just to get, a little bit of kind of a narrative from your end about kind of, because we touched on the police force. I want to give people a little better idea on, you came back around to that purpose. What did that process look like of entering that path that you had put off, for so long, and kind of what was that process like?
Sure. Well, number one, I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy than my younger counterparts. So my wife and I were living in California, and this is kind of how it started. And we were living in Santa Barbara, and there was a circular that came in the mail for Santa Barbara City College. And Jared, I never looked at those things. They always went in the recycling.
Right.
At lunch one day, I'm kind of leafing through it, and there's a class. And the class is like, you pass the class, and you can apply to be a reserve police officer with any agency within the state. So I'm sitting at dinner with my wife that night, and I'm like, hey, hon, what do you think about this class? She said, what do you think about it? I said, I'd like to take it. I'd like to try and see if I can pass it and see where we go from there. She said, well, then go do it. I will support you. Absolutely. Go do that. So it was a night class. I was a customer service manager at the time for an academic publishing company. Well, I passed the class. I applied to Santa Barbara PD, and they took me. So I was a reserve police officer. I'd work my customer service job all week. Friday night, I would come home, and I would put on my uniform, and I'd go to roll call. And I'd work from 7 at night till 7 in the morning. And my wife tells the story better than I do. She said, you would come in Saturday morning exhausted, because I hadn't slept in well over 24 hours.
Jeez.
With this big smile on your face. And she said, I knew that was what you were supposed to do. And shortly after that, our daughter was born. We moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. And I said to her again, I said, look, I want to do this full time. I want to go to the police academy. I want to, be a sworn officer and all that. And will you support me? Absolutely. Go ahead and do it. And that started, I was an undercover drug cop. I was on the SWAT team. I couldn't get enough of, this is what I was supposed to do. And it'd been 37 years. And now I'm finally getting this opportunity to do it. I was so excited. I was like a kid in a candy store.
Right.
But it was the support of my family that really grounded me, that allowed me to do that. And, there were a lot of times it's like, come on, we're going out to the bar after, a shift or after a SWAT call. It's like, no, I love you guys. I would lay down my life for you, but I'm going home, because that was my sanctuary. That was where I recharge the batteries. Those are the people that love me unconditionally. So,
No,
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of
it does. No, absolutely. And I think that's a great segue as well, and how important the people around you are when it comes to being able to enact your purpose. There was one actually quote that you said, quote, "I would argue that peace, simplicity, and serenity of your life provide you the fostering backdrop to lead your uncommon and extraordinary life." And it's interesting because so many parallels I've found in my own personal journey is that's like the fertile soil, right? If you have people in your immediate realities, even like your home life, who don't believe in you or say, get your regular job, or, whatever the situation might be, how critical that support structure is to be able to kind of have all variables isolated. So your energy is not being pulled and leaked and downed in different directions, so you can, really propel forward in that purpose. I'd love to, in this instance, kind of hear in your experience how crucial your partner is specifically when it comes to being able to step into your purpose.
Yeah, it for me, it was absolutely important. I mean, when we lived in California, we had no family out there. It was just she and I, and then she got pregnant, and we had our daughter, and that was really the impetus to move back to the Midwest, because we had no support system when we were in California. But she did support me. I mean, so when I was on SWAT, and sometimes it was hard. I worked the night shift my entire career, and we would sit down Sunday night. She'd make a nice meal, and our daughter and I, we'd sit down. And when we were on SWAT, we carried pagers. That's how long ago this was. And the pager would go off, and you could just look in her eyes like, seriously, I worked all day to make this nice meal, and you got to go, don't you? Like, yeah, I kind of do. It was like with SWAT, or when I was in the drug unit. I just didn't sign up for that. It was like, look, this is an opportunity. Will you support me in this? You understand, this may be a little more dangerous and things like that. Yes, I will support you. And when it came time for me to get out of law enforcement, it was because she lost her job in Cincinnati and found another one in Houston. And so it was, you supported me through all this. Now it's my turn to support you and say, okay, it's time for us to move on. It's time for me to find something else. So our whole life has been about, I will support you. I will be there for you. And the other thing I will say about this is we have one child, a daughter, and I can tell you, and this probably wasn't really smart, but my family was always number one. I love being a cop, but my faith, my family, and my friends, always before what I did for a living. And there were times where it's like, I'm going to my daughter's piano recital. I'm going to her, third grade play. Even though I'm working nights, I'm going to give up sleep because that's how important this is to me. And there were many nights I would go to work, not many, but enough nights that I would go to work, on 4 hours of sleep, and I'm carrying a gun and I'm making decisions about what other people's lives might look like and things like that. So you got to balance it. It's a balancing act. And without my wife, I would not have been happy being a cop and being married and not have her support. It wouldn't have been fun.
Wow. Yeah, I think I can absolutely see how critical that is, because if the person that's the closest to you isn't all in, you're not going to get very far, and it's actually the opposite. Not only do you get further, you get probably exponentially further. I think the sum's greater than its parts in that way. When you truly have a partner that is fully in support of your mission, I think it does something even greater in terms of your fervor towards that mission. Yes. And I think one thing too I wanted to touch on, I think it's important for people to kind of understand is, purpose is messy. I think people expect like this divine light to hit them and say like, this is what you're supposed to do with your life, and as you were explaining, I mean, you're 24 hours, no sleep, you're doing the night classes, you're working your job, you're making all this happen because you're creating a life that can be centered around your purpose. And I think, it's important for people to understand that it's a lot of times not pretty. It is hard. It's not going to be some, golden road just, paved out in front of you. God or the creator is going to put you in the position and say, hey, here's your pamphlet, as you received through the mail. Hey, here you go. And now it's up to you to do that work and to make it happen. So I think it's just kind of understanding that dynamic, if you'd agree with that statement.
Oh, I absolutely would. And we like to think, and this is so not true. We like to think that our life is linear. We start at A and we work and we work and we work and we get to Z, whatever that ends up being. But life isn't linear. I mean, you work hard and then you plateau. And I learned this in basketball early. You work really hard, but then you like stagnate. It's like, I'm working my butt off, but I'm not getting any better. And then you keep working harder and then you get worse. And you're like, what am I doing? How can I get any worse? But then you keep working and maybe you get a little better and then you plateau again and then you get worse. But the direction is always positive. It may not always be positive, but you're moving where you're supposed to be. It's just not a straight line. It's up, down, plateau, up, down, plateau, plateau, up, down. But as long as you keep working at it, you will eventually get to where you want to be. I think you mentioned that earlier. It's not the destination. It's everything in between where you start and the destination. That's really what life is about.
Absolutely. And that gets one of your key points too as well in the book is about this mental toughness and not being so emotionally discouraged by failure. In reality, failure is just a clue of getting closer to the right answer, right? And it's our perception of that makes us quit and makes us think we are judged as losers or perceived in whatever which way. And I'd love for you to as well touch on that. Was it the Navy SEAL? Like, I don't want to misspeak, the 60-40 rule, if you don't mind jumping in on that.
Sure, the 40% rule. So there's a young man who works with my wife who's a former Navy SEAL, and he will contact me on my off weeks of treatment just to check up on me. Hey, how's it going? Things like that. And we talk a lot about what it means. I mean, this guy was in Iraq and Afghanistan and has been decorated for valor, and you would never know it. He's the most humble, most gracious, most loving human being in the world. And you look at him, you're like, I know you could kill me with the eraser of a pencil 15 different ways, but he's that kind of a guy. And the SEALs kind of have this, they call it the 40% rule, which basically says that if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, that you're only at 40% of your maximum and you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So, and we know this is true. I mean, you think about marathon runners. We know marathon runners kind of hit that wall and they're like, if you can keep going, if you can just keep putting one foot in front of the other, eventually you'll get that second wind and you'll be able to finish the race. So, it's true, this 60-40, this 40%. I'm not even at half of my capability, but it's our brains that tell us, hey, this hurts. It's uncomfortable. Knock it off. And we listen to our brains because it's trying to protect us. It's that mammalian brain that, don't do anything. It's like if you got up this morning, Jared, and said, I'm going to go skydive. Your brain would be like, wait a minute, Jared. We might crash. The parachute may not open. No, you're not doing that. Very few people get, yeah, go ahead, Jared, do that. It's your brain protecting you from all the adverse things that might happen in your life. But the only way you're going to grow is to get into those adverse things and see what happens. Absolutely.
And this gets maybe a little bit on a philosophical angle, but it's something I'm always interested in discussing and seeing and hearing people's perspectives. Because the way you describe that is like we are separate from the mind. Is that, maybe would you say that we perhaps are a soul in a body and we have dominion over that mind? Because the way that you position it is that we are not the mind and we can hear that mammalian brain and say, I'm not listening to you. You're trying to help me survive, but I'm in charge here. And who is I in that instance?
Yeah. I think so many of us think we're a body that has a soul. And I agree with you. I think we're a soul that just happens to be in a body. And I've seen so many people in my life, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. We're gonna get enough rest. We're gonna exercise. We're gonna eat right. We're gonna do all these things to protect and to enhance our physical body. And that's great. I'm not telling you shouldn't do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day work on who you really are, which is your heart, your mind, and your soul. We don't spend nearly as much time working on our heart, mind, and soul as we do our physical body. But we also know that at some time, it's still, what do you get for living, loving, and laughing? You get death. That's the ultimate outcome of death. We know this body's going to die. It's going to decay. It's going to go away. But your heart, your mind, and your soul, those things are eternal. Those things live on. And I just don't think we spend enough time working on them. So absolutely, I think we're a conglomerate of a heart, a mind, and a soul, and a body that houses that. But we think, look at me, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to pump up. That's great. I got news for you. 40 years after you're dead, you ain't going to look that good. I can promise you that. You spend a lot of time working on that. How much time do you spend working on your mind, working on your spirit, working on your heart, and helping other people and things like that? That, to me, that's what life is about. And don't get me wrong, I spent a lot of time working on my body, being a college athlete and things like that, getting to that. And that's important. I'm not saying you should abuse your body, but I'm also saying you should probably find the balance between your body and your spirit.
I love that distinction. Very, very well put. And maybe we could change gears a little bit now, because you have, I'm always so fascinated by people that have lived fascinating experiences and getting their perspective. I'm so fascinated by perspective and kind of human nature. And so I'd love to kind of learn, maybe firstly, if you want to kind of share with the audience how you pivoted to SWAT. And then second, I'll kind of, ask my questions from there on. But yeah, if you don't mind, kind of give us kind of the next step in the narrative there.
Sure. So I was already a police officer in Cincinnati, and I've always wanted to be the best at whatever I did in my life. And SWAT, they're usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. So when there was an opening on the negotiating team, and I guess I should back up for a second, SWAT is usually kind of broken down into two groups. There's the tactical team, the tactical unit, and the negotiators. And we used to joke with the tactical team that if we did our job right, you didn't get to use all the little toys that you have as part of the tactical team. But those are the men and women that surround the house that have to go in and things like that. And so when there was an opening on the SWAT team, it was, you had to do the physical fitness part. You had to do a 1.5 mile run, push-ups and sit-ups. You had to meet with the psychologist. You had to meet with the command staff. And then you had to meet with the team. And the team, it was an all or nothing. I mean, if one person said, hey, I've worked with Terry before, he's kind of hard to work with or it's difficult to work with, you didn't get on. And so I was lucky to get a thumbs up from everybody on the team and become part of that. So it was like, great, I'm going to get all this cool training. I'm going to learn all this stuff. And I'm sure you're going to have questions that I'll be able to tell you kind of what a knucklehead I was when I first started out doing this. So that's how I got into it.
Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Well, one thing I'm really interested to learn is, what's the number one thing you learned about human nature through these experiences, through hostage negotiations and these, real unfortunate circumstances? What would you say is your number one takeaway just from the experiences that you had in that role?
That's a great question. I mean, I learned so much, but I guess I would say this. Every relationship, and again, we're negotiating with people, but let's be honest. If you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, you're probably having the worst day of your life up to this point. So we're trying to negotiate with somebody that's having a horrible day, that we've never met, that we have no idea many times why we're even there, what got them to do what they do. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to develop trust. Because any good relationship, whether it's husband, wife, parent, child, boss, subordinate, if you don't have trust in that relationship, it is not a good relationship. It very well may be a toxic relationship. So we're trying to develop trust with a human being we've never met before. And that was all the learning, the training, the techniques that we learned through that got us to be able to do that.
Wow. Very cool. Yeah, I'm sure that, learning just how quintessential trust is in life. I mean, because if you can go to the extremity of a hostage negotiation and be able to, have even successful outcomes, I believe you said, was it about 80% of the time? Am I
about 90% of the time we were successful getting the person out.
Wow, that's incredible. And just the power of trust. I mean, you'd think you can get like your boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever to trust you, but just the power of it, I think underlying that is love. I think there's a sense of goodwill and caring for that person that's sensed. I think even on a deeper level, if you would agree, it speaks even just the power of, as you were saying, just the primacy of love.
It was. I mean, when we would negotiate with somebody, we wouldn't start out with, hey, I'm Officer Tucker, or I'm Sergeant Tucker or something, or I'm a police. It would be, hi, I'm Terry. What's your name? And a lot of times it would be, you don't need to know my name. Okay. What would you like me to call you? And so it would start with that. And like I said, a lot of times we had no idea why we were there, what kicked this off, why this person did what they did. And so we would use what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. Help me to understand where you're coming from, what's going on, however you wanted to phrase it. And the key word there is understand. If you were a homicide suspect that just murdered 3 people, I was not going to be like, oh yeah, I totally understood why you did that. I totally agree that you did that. So it was, help me to understand where you're coming from, because understanding builds trust, and trust gets me to a point where I can get you potentially out safely. So that was the whole. So how do you do that? A couple ways. One, we never used why questions, because think about, Jared, when you were growing up, you did something wrong. What'd your parents do? Jared, why did you do that? Why questions sound accusatory. Jared, why did you wear that tie today? Oh, wait a minute. Does Terry not like the tie that I'm wearing? So
Right.
It's almost like an accusation. I can get to the same answer by saying, hey, Jared, what made you decide to wear that tie today? It lands softer. So we would use how and what questions. We would stay away from why questions. We would do mirroring or parroting. In other words, whatever you said, we would take either the most important words or the last 2 or 3 words, and we would just basically kick it back at you with kind of a curious tone. We were always taught to be curious. So you don't think you could do that, Jared? And then we would go silent because we don't like silence. And you get the other person to start talking again. So we would do that. And the other thing, and the reason hostage negotiation was so exhausting, is you had to get down in the weeds with these people. So if somebody's yelling and screaming and ranting and raving about their mother, and you say something like, oh, you seem like you're a little upset with your mother. No, you totally missed what that person was saying. You got to be, man, you are pissed as hell at your mother, are you? Yeah, I am. Because again, the person's like, Terry gets me. He understands me. Again, we're back to understanding. Understanding builds trust. Trust lets me get you out. So that whole part of that situation, we were taught to be curious. And I'll give you something it's really kind of funny. We were taught to smile. And we're smile. We're 2 blocks away talking on the phone with this guy. What do you mean smile? You're nuts. No. When you smile on the phone or at somebody, we have mirror neurons in our brain. If I were to smile at you, your mirror neurons would engage, and without even knowing it, there's a good chance you would smile back at me.
Right.
That smile comes through on the other end. And I'll end with this. The reason negotiations took so long is because we needed people to burn off a lot of that emotional energy, because we don't make good decisions with our emotional brain. We make better decisions with our rational brain. And the last thing I'll say about this is this. We never lied to people. And people would say to us, look, I'll put the gun down, I'll let the hostages go, I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say something like, really? We've been talking for 5 hours. I've been honest with you. I haven't lied to you. And now you want me to lie to you? You know when you come out, you're going to go to jail. And then we try to deflect the conversation to something that was more palatable that they could sort of hang their hat on. So I know I gave you a lot there, but that's kind of...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's really great stuff, and it ties in well with your, kind of the aspect of your book where you're talking about where you're, number one, listening more than you talk, but not listening to respond, but listening to understand, and the power of that communication skill, and how that much in your story as well, like shifted your life as well. So I think even in that situation, it's just an exacerbated example, but even shows the, how powerful those tenets are of listening to understand and mirroring and really helping people understand that you understand. I think it's just such a foundation, of communication.
It really is. And let me give you this, because this was the very first thing we got as negotiators was how we as human beings communicate. And this works for anybody. It doesn't have to be cop or bad guys or just you and me talking. The formula they gave us was 738-55. So 7% of how we communicate a message with another person are the words that we use. And think how many times you've said something and be like, ooh, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I would have said it differently. That's only 7% of how that message comes across. 38% is the tone of voice that you use. Are you really excited and you can't wait to tell the person what's going on? Or are you kind of Eeyore-ish, things are bad, it's not going to work today. You're like that. 38%. And 55%, so more than half of how you communicate a message, is your body language and your facial expressions. And they gave us that formula to let us know that, like I said, if you're barricaded in a room with a gun, I'm not in the room with you. That would not be safe. So we didn't have that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying something to somebody and see them kind of roll their eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe Terry said that to me. So we had to get good, certainly based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it.
Very, very, very interesting nuance there. Yeah, thank you for breaking that down. I think that's going to be really valuable just for anyone looking to, improve communication in terms of loved ones, friends, relationships, even business relationships. Obviously, like this, I have a sales background, and this very much applies to sales. Mirroring, and these are sort of perennial types of concepts. So it's very interesting to see even those applied to situations extreme as hostage negotiations, and see they're still equally as valid and successful. And it just shows really how constant those types of attributes of our human nature and our minds are.
Absolutely.
Now, kind of one of the other things to kind of switch gears a little bit is, I think, from kind of like a side of even manifestation, if you will, kind of on one of the key tenets is embodying, that highest version of yourself to attract the outcomes that are vibrationally proportionate to that frequency you're on, and you embodying that highest version of yourself. And one of your tenets was, you are the person that you are looking to become. And it's so resonant with me because it really feels that way. And it's, I think everything has a vice, right? I think us humans are really good at making good things into vices. And what I mean by that, we can make anything a vice. It can even be like prayer. So I think something as spiritual and as positive as self-development and manifestation turns into a whole other externalization, which is that version of me is over there. Just like I need that car over there to be valid. Well, now all of a sudden the best version of yourself is also outside of you. And it's like this wake up. It's like, well, it's still you, like you are the person. I'd love to just hear your elaboration on that point, since this is your tenet.
Yeah. And that goes back to, kind of what we were talking about before. I was in these roles in business and, hospital administration. I worked for Wendy's when I got out of college in their marketing department, but I always felt I was a police officer. And so it was, I was the person I was looking to become. I knew I was going to become that person someday. Didn't know when, but I was that person. So I was conducting myself in a way, sometimes not in a good way, because I was immature and I didn't understand and I was young and things like that. But that I knew I was going to be that person. How would that person act? How do I manifest that in my life as a marketing person, as a hospital administrator? What qualities do I have? How buttoned down I am. How curious am I? How do I learn how to talk to people? And I think those opportunities to be in business made me a better police officer. They allowed me to talk to people. Law enforcement, I think today is not necessarily a field that a lot of people want to get into, but every now and then somebody will reach out and they'll be like, what do you recommend for me if I want to be good as a police officer? And this is what I tell everybody. Put your devices down and go out on the street and talk to the homeless guy, and go up to the penthouse and talk to that person. Because if you can talk to a variety of people, you can be good at that. If the only way you can communicate is on that little box going like this, you'll be miserable as a cop. So that was something I learned. I talked to all kinds of people when I was in the hospital, when I was in Wendy's and things like that. And I just think that led me, and I don't think, honestly, Jared, I don't think I realized it at the time, but that led me to be a better communicator, and I think a better hostage negotiator as well.
Sure. And I think in that same kind of seeing in retrospect concept, you could almost even argue for yourself that maybe those things were supposed to happen so that because your destiny was law enforcement, you were just being prepared to be that effective as you were with those skills that you had gained beforehand, even potentially as an angle to look at it, if you've thought of it that way as well.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I always felt that whatever I was doing was leading me to where I was supposed to be. You know, it was like, okay, did I love getting up in the morning and going to work at Wendy's? No disrespect to Wendy's. No, I didn't. I mean, I couldn't wait to get out of bed to go be a cop, you know, and that's, you know, if you want to know what your purpose is, if you can't wait to get out of bed and go do something, then you might want to think that might be your purpose in life. But it was also, you know, you kind of have two handles in life. You have the, do I have to, or do I get to? And, you know, do I have to go to work? Do I have to get out? Or do I get to go to work? Do I get to go out? And I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't always I get to. It was like, oh gosh, do I really have to get out of bed and go to work today? But there were a lot of times where it was like, I get to go do this. I'm going to learn something new. This is outside my comfort zones. I'm kind of pushing the envelope here a little bit. I don't know about this. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at this. I don't know if I'm going to like it. But all of that was leading me to, you're going to use these skills in some way, shape, or form in being in law enforcement.
Very cool. Yes, I love tracing people's stories as well and seeing the divine sort of blueprint of how that kind of came to fruition. So that's so inspiring to hear. And I think that gets kind of to wrap around to another tenet as well. This kind of relates to, I think it was principle 8, which is fail often, especially when you're young. As you were saying, it's, you know, you may not have all the experience. You may be going into something just, you know, it's your passion, but you're going to hit 100 roadblocks along the way. You know, and one of the quotes used, which I was in love with, which was Thomas Edison saying, I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And it's such a powerful paradigm flip, right? Of seeing failures as steps closer to a goal as opposed to an actual loss. So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on kind of the concept of failing often, as you wrote in here.
Sure. So I guess let me tell you this story. This was a guy by the name of Jeff Wetzler who wrote a book called Ask. And I wish I would have known this when I was younger. Because maybe you did this, Jared. You know, we kind of put these arbitrary mileposts out there where we say, okay, by the time I'm 28, I want to be making 100, and I'm just making this up, making $100,000 a year. By the time I'm 34, I want to be married and have a family. And when those mileposts come and go and we're not there, we tend to look at ourselves as, I'm failing in life. I'm not getting to where I am. And Wetzler, he said, look at your life differently. Look at your life like this. He said, look at your life in decades. So in your 20s, do anything that interests you at all, professionally, spiritually, emotionally. You know, I want to play the sport. I want to go listen to this music, whatever it is, and mess up, fail often. Not for the sake of failing, but for what you learned, for the lessons that failing when you did certain things taught you. And then he says in your 30s, find those 2 or 3 things that really speak to you and dig into them a little bit. And then he says in your 40s, when you're more mature, you understand how life works, maybe you're more financially set, find that one thing that you're supposed to do and dig into it. And then he says in your 50s and your 60s and beyond, you can reap the benefits. You can reap the rewards of living your life in decades. And when I heard that, I was like, man, I wish I would have known that when I was young, you know, because I was doing these arbitrary mileposts. Well, I'm not there, so I must be failing in life. Nelson Mandela had a great quote. Nelson Mandela is the former president of South Africa. And he said this. He said, I never lose. I either win or I learn. So even if you lose, what did you learn from that lesson? You're not a failure unless you start blaming other people in life. Take the lessons you're supposed to learn from your mistakes, apply them to whatever, a new business, a new venture, whatever it is, and move forward in your life. Failure is a part of life. The road to success is paved with failure. Some people don't think that. They look at Taylor Swift like, look at, she's a billionaire and she's done all this. I guarantee you, Taylor Swift has written some dog songs that she'd probably be like, these things are terrible. She's failed in her life. I can promise you that.
Absolutely. I think that's something that's so lost. And with the social media is the highlight reel. Yeah. You're getting everyone's highlight reel. And it almost be strange to have success without having some type of tribulation. It'd be kind of strange if someone just became a multimillionaire and never had a single problem. It's like, well, you should be studied. You never, never a single problem. Like, wow, you're a different level of genius, I guess. So it's just,
yeah.
It's almost like common sense. Like, of course there's going to be failure. And I think the sooner you can internalize that and see it as information, I kind of think of it almost like an AI, right? Like, if you are an AI and you just collect data, your whole goal is to get closer to a goal. You succeed, do more of that. You fail, that's not a solution. And you start cutting out things that don't work and start honing in on things that do work. And you just collectively get closer and the parameters get tighter around the solution, and you eventually find the solution. And it's the emotion of the failure, quote unquote, that colors it into something other than just information that's taking you closer to the goal. And I think that's why people quit, is they can't see it as just a step closer. They look at it as a step further, if you will.
I do. And I've never even thought about what you just said about AI and, kind of cutting out the bad, what I learned. That's a great way of looking at it. But I think that's because people, they care about what other people think, and I always, especially with young people, I always tell them, why do you care what somebody else thinks of you when those people have never even tried what you failed at, not alone succeeded at in your life? Why do you care what those people think? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, especially when you're young. You want to be part of the in-group. You want to feel like you're part of the group and all that stuff. But if you look at it that way, it's like, why do you care what somebody says about how you wear your hair, what you wore to school that day, or anything like that? None of that matters in your life. And the interesting thing about social media is it allows you to say things to people, I'm going to say anonymously or kind of behind the scenes, that you wouldn't say to them if you were standing right in front of them. So anything that's said about me on social media, and I mean, there are people who haven't liked sustainable excellence. That's okay. I mean, nobody's totally bashed it, but at the same time, it was like, not everybody's going to like everything you do. Not everything's going to be successful in life. That's okay. It doesn't make you a failure. It just means you've learned something, use that, apply it, and move on.
And I think it also means you're being real, because like the being authenticity is inherently polar. You're gonna have on the side that like you, the side that doesn't like you, and the entire spectrum in between. It's when we're living in a state of people pleasing, is you end up just gray. You're flat. You aren't even anything unique, because you're you chameleon for what this person likes and you chameleon for what that person likes. And then you're not even anyone. You're just basically a mime, that's just, based on the parameters of the moment. And so I think it's for people to understand, just as you were saying, is like, if people don't like something about you or something that you've done, but you're acting in love and you're doing something that you think is positive and service oriented, so doesn't like it, that means you're just really operating in your authenticity, because you're going to divide the waters, to some extent. That's the kind of the way I kind of conceptualize it. It's like a good sign in a certain way.
It is. And if people aren't mad at you or putting you down or something like that, then you're probably not doing anything important or anything special, anything that anybody's looking at. And you've got to have that thick skin. You've got to be like, I'm going to do this because I know it's my purpose. I mean, my own mother, my dad had died, but when I became a police officer, my mother was, no, you can make more money. Yeah, you're right, Mom. I can make more money. I'm not doing this because, anybody gets in law enforcement trying to make money is an idiot, because you're just not going to make that. But you're going to make a difference, or you can make a difference. And if you look at that's what's important in my life, the money part, you can make a good living, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, you're not going to have, your trust or anything like that being a cop. So, but what's important in life, and again, going back to the Alexander the Great story, there's the richest man, most important man in the world who's like, yeah, I realized too late that none of this matters.
Absolutely. Very well said. Yeah, I think it's a matter of, getting your needs met and then kind of hitting the afterburners. I think people get stuck in that. And it's just I think people in my observation, like to assign control over their lives to others.
Oh.
It's like whether it's the company is my, pseudo dad. It pays my bills. It has the rules, and I don't have any risk. I don't have any, any type of, difficulty in terms of like, is the business going to go out of business, or, new competitors or legal, and, you just get your check and you're good. And it's like, it's a state of comfort. And I think people get lost in that. And it's just so much easier just to give away the agency of your own life. And I think people get stuck at that step. It's like, you have to pay your bills. You have to be responsible and a, self-reliant individual. But that's when you've achieved the ability and the space to now enter that purpose and to now really step into that. That's kind of how I conceptualize it, at least.
Yeah. And, I can apply that to cancer. I've got a doctor who's telling me you're going to be dead in 2 years. But I always looked at doctors kind of like bookies in Vegas. They look at you and say, all right, based on your age, your overall health, and the stage of your cancer, you're going to live X. But what doctors don't know is you want to see your child graduate from high school. You want to see your daughter graduate from college. You want to walk her down the aisle. You want to play with your grandkids. And having something to look forward to, something that you're excited to get up and go do, is incredibly important. And I've also seen the reverse of that. And it's just what you said, Jared. I've seen people where doctors said, hey, you're going to be dead in 2 years. And literally on the anniversary of that second year, they're dead. I've always wanted my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not on the ones I didn't make or that somebody else made for me. So I wasn't about to roll over and say, well, I'm going to be dead in 2 years. It's like, no, that's not up to me. Someone bigger than me is going to make that decision. I'm going to figure out what this is supposed to teach me, and then I'm going to try to live that purpose.
That's a real warrior mindset. That's really incredible. And on a side note, what do you make of the placebo effect? Because that 2 years, and I trust that, and I put my intention and energy into that, because we know how much even the mind even affects DNA now through epigenetics. Like you kind of set that timer in a way, as you said, like on the day. That would unfortunately happen with some of those people where they told 2 years of the doctor, they gave that agency away, and they basically told themselves in their body, in their DNA, in their being that that's what it was, and it even worked. It ended that way in some cases. So I'm curious if you have even a perspective on the placebo effect in kind of your journey.
I do, and I wish I could remember the name of the book. There's
Becoming Supernatural.
No,
or the placebo effect by Dr. Joe Dispenza.
No, it's not that. It's a newer book, and it talks about the placebo effect. But it's research done into the brain that is saying that our brain is more of a predictive organ than it is an organ. And the reason I say that is because you and I may see a bank robbery, and the police may pull us apart. And I was like, okay, the guy had on a navy blue shirt and blue jeans and black sneakers. And you may say the guy had on a green shirt and khaki pants and dress shoes. It's like, wait a minute, you saw the same thing. What they're finding is that your brain will predict what it expects you to see. So you may see it, but your brain won't give you what you saw. Your brain will give you what it predicts. And that same thing applies. They talk about that in the book, the placebo effect of giving people medicine, or of saying, okay, we're going to bring you in and we're going to do an experiment, a test. We're going to give you a shot. We're going to give you a little bit of an allergen. You've got a little bump on your arm, and they're going to ask you to sit for 20 minutes, and it's going to be a control group and another group. And the control group is the people who check on you are not going to say a word, but the other group, the people that check on you, are going to say, hey, you'll be fine. This will go down in a few minutes. And they find that the people who were told that it'll go down in a few minutes, that it'll be fine, it does go down, and they're better. And the other people, it's still there. It doesn't, that's the same. They got the same thing, but somebody told you. So now your brain is like, this is going to work. I'm going to feel better in a few minutes because somebody told me that I was going to do it. So yeah, I absolutely believe in the placebo effect.
Wow. Yeah. I even read studies a while ago. It was about a certain type of tumor, and they basically told the individual that it was basically the most latest like leading edge, like super high powered, most like newest, greatest, most effective drug ever. And it was, placebo, and the tumor literally shrunk. Like I think it was terminal. I mean, it almost disappeared. It was almost gone. And then, I believe, I don't want to misstate the study, but she realized, that it was a placebo, and it came back. And so I think it's just even further towards just the power of our intention. I mean, I think we just so undersell. I mean, even in modern medicine, I mean, I just wish it wasn't so deterministic. I wish this was more of a state of, possibilities and ability to really have that, dominion over yourself and your life and your path.
But you do. And that's just it. But, like we were just talking, people look at somebody in a white coat with a bunch of initials after their name and say, well, they know what they're talking about. So if they said, I'm going to die in 2 years, I'm going to die in 2 years. But we know that our bodies can cure themselves. Our bodies can come up with what it needs to kill cancer, to starve it, to get rid of the blood flow to it. Our bodies can do that. We don't delve into that enough. We don't use our brains to control our bodies. And I'm a thorough believer. Like I say, I had something to look forward to in my life. Think about that. I've got 2 years to live, and I'm thinking about my grandkids. My daughter's in high school. I mean, think how far that is down the line. But my body's got something, my brain's got something to live for, something to move forward, something I want to do. And that alone is incredibly powerful in keeping you going. And like I said, I still have cancer. I still have tumors in my lungs, but I'm doing a whole lot better. Everybody who started this clinical trial drug that I've been on is dead. I'm still here, and I'm still fighting. And I use, my doctor said it, your body understands how to use this medicine. And it does. And I have terrible side effects when I get it. But every time I hurt and I'm throwing up and I'm shaking, I'm like, it's working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. So
that is so inspirational. Wow. Just so incredible. So thank you for sharing that. I think to wrap up here, I think a good kind of period on the sentence here is, the role of God in our lives. I know we've touched on it definitely a lot throughout the conversation, but, really how quintessential that is in your experience through your life journey. And I think another thing I like to ask most people who are spiritual, depending on no matter where they come from, and I really respect the way that you handled things in your book when you talked about I believe it was high school, where you had the religious organization, and when you went out of town, wouldn't let your vice president do the meetings because sorry?
It was in college.
Oh, it was in college. Sorry. And you wouldn't let him run the meetings because, he would get on to other denominations of Christianity or other religions. And your whole thing was just a non-interference, let people believe and have the faith that they have. And I really resonate with that philosophy. I'm just curious, number one, of course, just the importance of God conceptually, in our lives. And secondarily, do you believe that everyone can have sort of if everyone can get the same type of benefit or connection through different channels, whether that is through Islam, whether that is through even different denominations of Christianity, or through Judaism or, Hinduism, can they achieve a similar effect in their lives coming from those different angles?
I would like to say yes. And I wish I could remember I wish I had said this. So if somebody knocked on your door and said, hey, Jared, you don't know. I'm a total stranger. Hey, I want to come in. I want to use your shower. I want you to make me a meal. I want to sleep, in your guest bedroom. You're good with that, right? What would you say?
Who are you?
Exactly. You're like, no, absolutely not. There's nothing altruistic here. But I look at it like the same thing works with God. If you're the kind of person, I think denominations, I don't think you should believe in a denomination. I don't think you should believe in the word. I'm Catholic. I believe in it. It works for me. But I think it's just like if you were to knock on heaven's gates and say, hi, I'm here, and you had totally dissed God and totally not been, God was never a part of your life growing up, do you think God's going to say, yeah, sure, come on in? Yeah, it's like, it's going to be the same
water's
thing.
fine. Yeah.
I mean, I was never part of your life when you were on earth. So why do you think you're going to be part of heaven at this point in time? So I think, and I think this just goes back, we all should be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And for me, that's God. Like I said, when I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. I don't spend much time worrying about that. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love, and it goes like this. When you were born, you cried, and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way, and those are the important words. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
Wow. And with that serious mic drop, I think we will conclude today. But Terry, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for your insights and wisdom. I know I have learned a lot and gained a lot. I'm sure the audience has as well. Before we wrap up here, I'd love to take a quick second to share where they can find you, where they can find your work. And I, of course, will link everything in the description for everyone. But just a quick second if you want to share.
Sure. The easiest way to find me, to get a hold of me, leave me a message, is motivationalcheck.com. It's my blog and website. My social media links are on there. I've got recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. You can reach out to me, motivationalcheck.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Terry. Really appreciate your time once again.
Thank you, Jared. I really enjoyed this.
Awesome. Take care, Terry. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Quantum Theory Podcast. If you desire to embark on the path of self-mastery, visit quantumtheorypodcast.com to join a like-minded community of purpose seekers committed to personal growth.